He ruled boardrooms, moved markets, and built an empire on precision until an 8-year-old girl walked into his office, sat in his chair, and said, "I think you used to know my mom." What came next wasn't a scandal, a deal, or a crisis. It was a letter. 5 words that shattered everything. "She's yours." In one heartbeat, the most controlled man on Wall Street was thrown into a life he never saw coming. But what if the thing he never planned for was the only thing that could save him? Cameron Wexler arrived at exactly 8:58 a.m. Not 8:55, not 9 o'clock. He didn't believe in approximations. In his world, 2 minutes early meant control, power, efficiency, things that had built his reputation, his empire, and his legendary intolerance for surprise. His driver barely had time to open the door before Cameron stepped out, perfectly pressed in a charcoal suit, espresso in hand, phone pressed to his ear. "No, Robert," he said calmly. "We're not moving the funding round. If the vendors can't meet our timeline, they'll be replaced." The lobby of Wexler Holdings was already humming. Assistants clipped past in heels, interns clutched tablets like life vests, and the floor-to-ceiling windows let in a gray New York sky that matched the steel nerves of its occupants. Cameron nodded to no one. He didn't need to. People moved when he entered a room, not because he was loud, but because silence followed him like a signature. He took the executive elevator to the top floor, stepped into his private office suite, and paused for the briefest breath of stillness before the 9 a.m. strategy review. But when he opened the door to his office, the stillness shattered, because someone was already sitting in his chair. Not an executive, not a secretary, a child, a little girl no older than 8 with braids and scuffed sneakers and a Hello Kitty backpack slouched beside her. She was tiny, dwarfed by the leather-backed power seat she sat in like it was a throne built just for her. Cameron froze. The silence wasn't reverent this time. It was stunned. The girl looked up at him calmly, not frightened, not confused, just waiting. He stepped forward, uncertain for the first time in a very long time. "Excuse me, who are you?" She looked at him without blinking. Her voice was quiet but unwavering. "My name is Harper," she said, "and I think you used to know my mom." He blinked. "Your mom?" She reached into her backpack and pulled out a folded photo, slid it across the glass desk like someone twice her age. He picked it up, heart thudding. It was a picture of himself and her. Not the little girl. The woman in the photo beside him, smiling, windswept, holding a camera, was someone he hadn't seen in over a decade. Her name fell from his lips like an echo. "Lena." Harper nodded. "She's gone now, but she told me if anything ever happened to her, I was supposed to find you." The photo shook in his hand. Cameron Wexler, the man who held nations in meetings and crushed markets with phone calls, sat slowly into the guest chair across from the little girl now occupying his place in the world. "What happened to her?" he asked. Harper looked down. "It was fast. She got sick. I was with her the whole time." His voice was barely a whisper. "And she sent you to me?" Harper reached into her bag again and pulled out a sealed envelope. She slid it across the table. Cameron hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single handwritten note in Lena's careful script. "If you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Her name is Harper. She's yours." His hand trembled. His heart, so carefully encased in years of walls and marble and silence, sank into his chest like a stone thrown into water. And for the first time in years, Cameron Wexler had no idea what to do next. The letter fell from his hands. He didn't feel it leave his grip, didn't even register the light flutter as it hit the glass tabletop between them. All he could hear was the last sentence, looping in his head like a song stuck on repeat. "She's yours." Cameron Wexler had built his life on controlling the uncontrollable, on anticipating every risk, every angle, every human variable that might interrupt the clean trajectory of his empire. He had prepared for board coups, market crashes, federal audits, and firestorms of media scandal. He had not prepared for this. Harper remained silent in his chair, her feet dangling several inches above the ground, her hands folded in her lap like she was in school. But there was nothing childlike about her gaze. It was steady, too steady. The kind of look you only develop when life teaches you not to expect too much, but to notice everything. "How did you get in here?" he asked, because it was the only question his mind could manage. She pointed to the door. "I told the lady downstairs I had a meeting. I didn't lie. She just didn't ask with who." He ran a hand through his hair. "You're, what, 7? 8.5. And Lena, she never told me? She said you were busy." Her voice didn't accuse him. It didn't have to. "She said you had a very big life, and that you wouldn't have wanted anything that might slow you down." He swallowed hard. "Did she say that?" "She said you didn't know." Cameron leaned back, his chest tight, his pulse in his ears. He remembered Lena, the way her laughter never came with warning, how she challenged him in every conversation like it was a game they were playing together. They'd met at a tech conference in Berlin, shared 5 weeks of spontaneous, disorganized, intoxicating joy, and then parted with no hard feelings, no promises. He had buried himself in expansion. She had gone quiet, and apparently she'd been carrying more than just memories. "When did she pass?" he asked. 2 weeks ago. He winced. "And there's no one else?" "She said if something ever happened to her, I should find you, because even though you didn't know, you might want to. She said you were kind once." That last part broke something in him. He looked at her again, really looked, and saw it now. Her eyes, not his, Lena's, but the mouth, tight-lipped when thinking. That was him, and the way she tilted her chin slightly when she asked something difficult. "How did you get here?" he asked. "Where have you been staying?" "I stayed with Miss Carroll, my neighbor, but she's 82 and forgets things. The social worker said I might have to go into care soon, but I remembered the envelope and the name." She pulled something else from her backpack, a crumpled business card, his, from over a decade ago. He stared at it. It had no address, just a phone number, but she had found him anyway. He exhaled, slow and shaky. "Do you know what you're asking me, Harper?" She nodded once. "I'm not asking you to fix everything. I just want to know if you want me." The air left the room. He stood suddenly, turning away from her, walking to the window where the skyline stared back at him, uncaring. The sun had risen a little higher, turning the steel of the city gold at the edges. But his world felt dimmer. He pressed a hand to the glass. Did he want her? It wasn't that simple. She was a stranger and yet not. A child. His child. And somehow this tiny human with her scuffed shoes and weathered dignity had walked past every guardrail of his life and straight into his center. He turned back around. "I don't know what to do," he said honestly. Harper tilted her head. "You could start by sitting where you're supposed to." He blinked. She pointed to the chair across from the desk. "You usually sit there, right? It's your office." He almost smiled. Almost. He walked slowly, deliberately, and sank into the chair across from her, the guest chair for now. She studied him for a moment, then reached across the table and picked up the letter he'd dropped. She slid it toward him again. Mom wrote the rest on the back. He turned it over. There, in Lena's unmistakable handwriting. "If you're afraid, that's okay. I was too. But she's brave enough for both of you. Don't run, Cam. She's the best part of me, and maybe she'll be the best part of you, too." His throat tightened. He folded the letter carefully, then looked at Harper. "I don't have all the answers," he said, "and I don't know how to be a father." She nodded. "I don't know how to be someone's kid either. We can figure it out." Something cracked open in his chest. Small, but real. "Would you like some breakfast?" he asked. She considered this. "Can I have waffles?" he stood. "Let's see what we can find." And just like that, a man who had built his life on logic, margins, and unshakable control walked out of his corner office, not to make a deal, not to sign a contract, but to buy waffles for the daughter he never knew he had. The cafe was just 2 blocks away, tucked between a dry cleaner and a bookstore that had been closing for years, but never quite followed through. Cameron had walked past it 1,000 times without once considering going inside. Now, with Harper's hand tucked lightly in his, it felt like stepping into a completely unfamiliar city. The hostess blinked when she saw them. A sharply dressed man in a tailored coat and a small girl in purple leggings and a too large sweatshirt with sparkles across the chest. "Table for 2?" she asked, trying not to stare. "Yes," Cameron said, clearing his throat. "And, she'd like waffles." Harper grinned at the woman. "With strawberries, and whipped cream, and syrup, and if you have powdered sugar, that too." The hostess laughed and led them to a booth in the back beside a window smeared with steam. Cameron sat across from Harper, his hands resting on the table, unsure of what to do with them. "Do you come here often?" Harper asked, peering at the menu, even though she'd already decided. He shook his head. "I've never been in here before." She looked surprised. "Why not?" "I usually eat in my office or at business lunches." "That doesn't sound very fun." "It's not," he admitted. Their server, a cheerful guy with an eyebrow piercing and a name tag that read Jasper, came to take their order. Harper gave hers confidently. Cameron asked for coffee and whatever the chef recommended. As they waited, Harper folded her napkin into tiny triangles and looked up at him thoughtfully. "So, what do you do?" He blinked. "You mean for work?" "Yeah. You're a big important person, right?" He hesitated. "Some people think so. I run a company. We build technology and fund other companies that make apps and services." Harper tilted her head. "Like video games?" "Sometimes." She considered that. "Mom said you were smart, but didn't know how to rest." That drew a genuine laugh from him, short, startled, but real. "She always did say things like that." Harper nodded. "She said you worked too much, but she never sounded mad about it, just sad." He didn't reply right away. Instead, he watched her unwrap a straw and drop it into her water with the concentration of a scientist. Did she ever talk about me, besides the envelope?" "She said you were good at seeing people, even when they were trying not to be seen. That's why she liked you." He looked down at the table, at the pale wood scratched with the initials of strangers. "She was the only person who ever told me to slow down." "She told me that too," Harper said, "especially when I was scared." The food arrived, her plate piled high with golden waffles, fruit, and enough whipped cream to fill a bowl on its own. Cameron's was a modest omelet with a slice of toast, but he barely noticed it. Harper dug in like she hadn't eaten in days, which he realized with a twist of guilt might have been true. "I can't stay with Miss Carroll anymore," she said between bites. "The social worker said she's not stable enough." "Where are you supposed to go?" "They said maybe a temporary foster family, but I didn't want that. I didn't want to be with people who didn't know her." He nodded slowly. "Do they know where you are now?" "I called the caseworker and left a message. Told them I found you, that you'd talk to them." Cameron ran a hand over his face. "Right. Of course." He pulled out his phone, opened his calendar, and then stopped. There were 3 back-to-back meetings this morning, an investor check-in, a board review, and a lunch with a major client. But all he could think about was the girl across from him, carefully slicing her waffle into neat squares, her eyes darting to his every few moments to check if he was still real. He opened his contacts and called his assistant. "Janine," he said, "clear my schedule, all of it." There was a pause. "Sir? Reschedule? Cancel? Whatever it takes. I won't be in the office today, possibly tomorrow too." Another pause. "Understood. Is everything okay?" He looked at Harper. "No," he said softly, "but it will be." They stayed at the cafe longer than he expected, almost 2 hours, though neither of them tracked the time. Cameron wasn't used to letting time pass without measuring it, but with Harper, the minutes stretched in ways that felt strangely weightless. She talked more after the second cup of syrup, about her school, about her cat named Noodle, who had gone to live with a neighbor when Lena got sick, about how she used to sit beside her mom at night and listen to audiobooks when the pain got too bad for Lena to read aloud, about how she could tell when someone was lying, not because of their words, but because of their shoulders. People lie with their shoulders, she explained between bites. When they say, "I'm fine," but curl in like they're hiding. You don't do that, you just go stiff like you're bracing for something. Cameron stared at her. You're very observant. Mom said I got that from you. When the plates were cleared and the check paid, Cameron walked her outside into the bright late morning sun. He glanced down at her backpack. You brought everything with you? She nodded. Miss Carroll said I should, just in case. Just in case what? In case you said no. His stomach twisted. They stood on the sidewalk, the city streaming past them like usual, horns and footsteps and noise, but suddenly it all seemed irrelevant. Cameron took a breath. Would you like to come with me for a bit, just see where I live? Harper looked up at him. You mean like your house? He nodded. Yes. I thought rich people didn't live in houses. He chuckled. We do. They just look more like glass museums than homes. Can I touch stuff? I'll allow it, carefully. Her smile was small, but real. They took a cab. His usual town car was tied up, and Cameron sat beside her instead of across from her, like he usually did with colleagues. She pressed her face against the window as the car climbed out of Midtown and into the Upper East Side, pointing at things occasionally. A bakery, a dog in a coat, a woman juggling coffee cups like a circus act. This your neighborhood? She asked. He nodded. Has been for years. The car pulled into the underground garage of his building. The doorman gave him a puzzled glance when he saw the child, but Cameron simply nodded once in acknowledgement and kept walking. Up the elevator, 38 floors to the top. The penthouse opened like a secret into a space that was all clean lines and quiet tones. Stone countertops, black leather, brushed metal. Everything immaculate, cold, controlled. Harper stepped inside and whispered, Whoa, this smells like magazines. He almost laughed. She walked slowly, cautiously, examining the living room, the kitchen, the tall windows framing the city like a painting. Then she looked at him. Do you ever laugh here? The question wasn't meant to hurt, but it did. He cleared his throat. Not often. She walked over to the coffee table, picked up a marble sculpture the size of a grapefruit. Is this real? Yes, Italian. Heavy. She put it down carefully. Do you have a room for me? He blinked. No, not yet. But there are guest rooms. Can I see? He nodded and led her down the hallway to a minimalist guest room. Gray bedding, a sleek nightstand, a wall-mounted TV. Harper stepped inside, her footsteps oddly loud against the hardwood. It's like a hotel, she said. That's probably fair. She sat on the bed and bounced twice. Can I put my stuff here? His mouth went dry. You can. She didn't unpack right away. Instead, she looked around the room again and then said, without turning, Did you love my mom? He didn't answer for a long time, and then quietly, I think I did. I just didn't know it until I was too late to say so. Harper nodded, as if that made sense. She didn't want you to feel bad, but I think she wanted you to feel something. Cameron sat in the chair by the window, his hands clasped between his knees. I feel it now. Good, Harper said softly. Then we can start. He looked up. Start what? She shrugged. I don't know. Being whatever we're going to be. You don't have to be perfect. He let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. I've never done this, he said. Neither have I, she replied, and in that moment it was enough. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was beginning. The next few days unfolded in a rhythm Cameron had never experienced before, unpredictable, uneven, filled with awkward silences and sudden moments of unexpected grace. Harper stayed. Not as a guest, not as a visitor, but as someone tentatively claiming space. She didn't demand much. She set her own alarm, brushed her teeth without reminders, and made her bed every morning with hospital corners that stunned him the first time he noticed. When he asked where she learned that, she shrugged and said, "Hospice nurses are really tidy." She started organizing the guest room. She moved her backpack under the desk, arranged her few clothes into neat stacks inside the closet, drew pictures and taped them to the wall. Crayon sketches of city streets, a cat she missed, a woman with a soft smile and tired eyes, holding hands with a girl who had Harper's crooked front tooth. The first time he saw the drawing, he didn't speak. He just stood in the doorway, taking it in. "Is that her?" he asked finally. Harper nodded. She always looked tired, but not in a bad way. She said it was the kind of tired that comes from loving hard. He nodded slowly, stepping further into the room. "And you?" She looked up at him. She said I was the reason she didn't give up. The drawing remained where she taped it, just above the nightstand. No frame, just a thumbtack, holding memory in place. Cameron rearranged his world quietly. He started working from home, told his partners that he was handling family matters. When one board member pushed back, Cameron replied with a tone that brooked no further questioning. "This is non-negotiable." He started keeping snacks in the kitchen that weren't kale or imported crackers. He bought milk that wasn't almond or oat. He had no idea what kind of cereal kids liked, so he bought 5 kinds. Harper only ate 2 of them, but she grinned when she saw the box with cartoon ghosts on it. She made it easy in the ways that mattered. She didn't break things or throw tantrums or expect him to know how to braid hair, but she also didn't pretend things were perfect. One evening, a week after she'd arrived, he found her sitting on the floor of the guest room staring at a closed notebook. "What's that?" he asked, kneeling beside her. She looked up slowly. "It's my mom's journal. I've only read the first page." "Why haven't you read more?" "I'm scared," she said quietly. "What if it makes me miss her more?" Cameron didn't speak. He just sat beside her, close but not touching, and waited. She opened the notebook slowly, hands trembling slightly. Then she read, "March 3rd. She told a joke today about pigeons and skyscrapers. I laughed so hard I cried. She didn't understand why, but it was the first time in days I forgot the weight in my lungs." Harper sniffed. "That was about me." He nodded. They read a few more lines together, quietly. Then she closed the notebook and tucked it back into the drawer. "She said you were the kind of man who didn't talk about feelings, but that you felt them anyway, like deep under the floorboards." He smiled faintly. "Sounds about right. She said she hoped one day I'd learn how to find your quiet, and that maybe you'd let me live there." That hit harder than anything he'd heard all week. He didn't have a reply, just stayed sitting beside her on the floor, breathing in silence, anchoring both of them to the moment. That night, as she slept, he stood in her doorway for a long time. She had kicked off her blanket, and he gently pulled it back over her. She stirred and mumbled, "Night, Dad." His heart stuttered. She didn't wake up, but he didn't sleep for a long time after that. 2 weeks after Harper moved in, Cameron received a phone call that froze him mid-step in the hallway. "Mr. Wexler," the voice on the other end said, polite but firm. "This is Tanya Melrose with Child and Family Services. We've been informed that Harper Morgan is currently residing with you." "Yes," he said, tightening his grip on the phone. She's staying with me." "I understand. We've received confirmation from the emergency foster report that she made contact with you voluntarily and that you are, according to her mother's letter, her biological father?" Cameron felt the air leave his lungs. "That's right." There was a pause. "Mr. Wexler, I'm going to need to schedule a home visit. We'll be reviewing suitability for temporary guardianship pending legal proceedings. You should also be aware there may be a challenge to her placement if other familial claims emerge." "Challenge?" he echoed, the word burning on his tongue. "Yes. Unless you are listed on the birth certificate, the system does require verification. We'll be asking for a DNA test, and, if you choose to pursue formal custody, court certification of paternity and intention. Cameron closed his eyes. Schedule the visit. They agreed on Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. That night, he didn't tell Harper. He didn't know how. She had been happier lately, lighter. She'd begun humming while brushing her teeth, started requesting pancakes on the weekends, even asked to visit the bookstore on 56th for a grown-up art journal. But the next morning, she sensed the shift. "You're quiet," she said, spooning cereal into her mouth. "I'm always quiet?" "Not like this." He set his fork down. "There's going to be a home visit," he said gently, "from someone who works with the city to make sure this is okay." Her spoon hovered over the bowl. "You mean like to see if you're good enough?" "Something like that?" She nodded slowly. "Are they going to ask me questions?" "They might." She chewed, then swallowed. "What should I say?" "Just tell the truth." She looked at him, her gaze steady. "You're scared too, aren't you?" He nodded. "Yes." That night, while she showered, he sat at his desk with the letter from Lena unfolded before him. He read it again, tracing her words like they were prayers. "She's brave enough for both of you." He wasn't sure he was. On Tuesday, the doorbell rang exactly at 9:27 a.m. Tanya Melrose stepped into the foyer, clipboard in hand, eyes scanning the space with polite professionalism. She was in her 40s, hair pulled tight, flats quiet against the polished floor. "Nice place," she said. "Sterile, but nice." Harper stood beside Cameron, clutching his hand. "Miss Melrose," he said, "this is Harper." The woman knelt, eyes kind behind sharp glasses. "Hi, Harper. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions while you're—" She paused. "While Cameron makes us some tea?" Harper looked at him. He nodded. "Okay," she said. They sat on the sofa together. Cameron walked into the kitchen, hand shaking just enough to spill a little water when he filled the kettle. From the other room he heard Harper's voice. Small, thoughtful. "He lets me paint, even though he didn't have paint in the house before." "I see," said Tanya. "And do you feel safe here?" "Yes." "Has he ever yelled at you?" "No, he mostly just listens." "Does he know how to cook?" "No," Harper said, giggling. "But he tries." Cameron returned with tea a few minutes later, and the rest of the visit passed with a blur of formalities, forms, signatures, a discussion about guardianship timelines, and legal next steps. But just before leaving, Tanya turned to him. "I've seen a lot of these situations," she said, "and I'll be honest, Mr. Wexler, I expected this to be a case of emotional obligation. Guilt, maybe. But she's not just surviving here. She's unfolding." Cameron's breath caught. "I'll recommend immediate interim guardianship," she said, scribbling something onto a form, "but you'll need to follow through. Courts need declarations, and proof you intend to stay." He looked down at Harper, who had gone back to coloring on the floor beside the coffee table. "I'm staying," he said. "Then I suggest you start learning how to be permanent." When the door closed behind her, Harper looked up. "Did I do okay?" He nodded, kneeling down beside her. "You were perfect." The next morning, Cameron sat in front of his office computer, but his screen was dark. He wasn't reading market trends or reviewing quarterly projections. Instead, he held a scanned copy of Lena's birth certificate application from years ago, forwarded by Child and Family Services. Under Father, the line was blank. He stared at it for a long time. Lena hadn't listed him, hadn't even put unknown, just left it empty, like a question she couldn't bring herself to answer. He didn't know whether it hurt more because she'd made that choice, or because he understood why. Back then he hadn't been ready. He wouldn't have answered her calls, and if he had, he might have offered money instead of showing up. He had been building an empire with no room for human mess, no margin for unexpected lives. And Harper had been the most unexpected life of all. He scheduled the paternity test without flinching, took the car to a clinic in Tribeca, walked through the glass doors with Harper at his side, filled out the forms, and sat in the sterile waiting room as if he were applying for something infinitely more important than a position. He was asking to become someone's father on paper. Harper squeezed his hand the whole time, didn't say a word, didn't need to. When it was done, they walked out into the sharp spring sunlight, the breeze carrying the first traces of thaw and possibility. "Did it hurt?" he asked as they crossed the street. "Nope," she said. "The cotton swab was kind of tickly." "Mine too." She looked up at him. "Are you nervous?" He considered that. "Not about being your dad, just about whether they'll believe I should be." She nodded. "They will. You sound pretty sure." "I'm good at reading people, and I read you." They stopped at a corner cafe, the kind he used to breeze past without noticing. Harper ordered a lemonade and a croissant. He got coffee and something savory that she insisted on sampling. They sat outside, and for a moment it felt like a scene from someone else's life. A quieter man, a confident girl, a morning where nothing else pressed in from the outside. But reality returned with a phone call. It was his attorney, Beth Kaplan. "I've reviewed the request from Child and Family Services. They're recommending you file for full legal guardianship immediately. You'll need to write a personal declaration for the court." "A declaration?" he asked. "A letter to the judge, explaining why you want to be her legal guardian, what your intentions are. It's standard, but important." Cameron didn't write letters. He wrote contracts, agreements, legal frameworks to bind and protect. But that night, after Harper went to bed, he opened a blank Word document and stared at it. And then, slowly, he began. "To whom it may concern, I am not writing this letter as a CEO or a donor or a man of influence. I am writing it as someone who spent the majority of his life chasing definitions of success that had nothing to do with meaning." Then one morning, a little girl walked into my office and sat in my chair. She wasn't angry. She wasn't afraid. She was simply home. Not because of me, because of what she carried in her, a quiet resilience, a bravery I couldn't have found in a boardroom if I tried. She looked me in the eye and asked if I wanted to know her. Not to fix her, not to save her, just to know her. And in that moment, my life split in two, the man I had been and the man I'm becoming. Her name is Harper. She is mine in ways deeper than biology. But if that's what the court needs, then yes, I'll give them that too. What I can't give up is the chance to raise her, to give her the home she's earned, to prove that love, even when it arrives late, can still be true. I ask for the right to stay, not as a visitor in her life, but as her father. Sincerely, Cameron Wexler. He printed it the next day. Harper watched him place it in the folder with the legal forms and said softly, "That's the first time you've called yourself my dad out loud." He looked at her. "It won't be the last." And for the first time since she arrived, she didn't just smile. She beamed. The court hearing was set for April 14th, just over 3 weeks. It didn't sound like a long time, but to Cameron, every day stretched like a thread pulled taut. He scheduled nothing major at work. His assistants whispered about his absence behind closed doors. His board grew impatient, and a few news outlets began sniffing around, curious why the famously unflinching Wexler was dodging meetings and appearing in public with a child who clearly wasn't his, or hadn't been, until recently. But he didn't care. He'd built his empire so it could run without him, and now he was using that luxury to do the only thing that mattered. Be present. Harper started calling the penthouse home without ceremony. She labeled her drawer in the fridge with a sticker. She changed the background on his phone to a photo of the two of them eating messy ice cream cones on the High Line. She filled the once sterile guest room with drawings taped up with painter's tape he didn't remember buying. She asked him if they could get a cat. He said yes, and 2 days later, They had a fluffy orange rescue named Pickles who liked to sleep on Cameron's briefcase. They were becoming a family in quiet, gentle steps. But the past had a way of knocking at inconvenient times. One knock came in the form of an envelope hand-delivered to his office. It was from Lena's sister, Meredith. He hadn't spoken to her in nearly a decade. He opened it in the kitchen while Harper was coloring, his pulse thudding. The letter was sharp, like Meredith had written it while pacing. "I know Harper is with you, and while I don't doubt that Lena may have left instructions, I want you to know that I'm considering filing for custody. I was there when Harper was born. I was there when Lena was sick. You weren't. Don't think a few months and a fancy apartment make you a father." It ended with a phone number and a warning. "If we can't talk like adults, I'll talk through the courts." He sat down hard. Harper looked up. "You okay?" He nodded too quickly. "Just tired." But that night, after she went to bed, he called the number. Meredith answered on the first ring. "That was fast. I didn't want to let it fester." "Well, aren't you responsible now?" "Don't start," he said, "please." There was silence on the line. Then she sighed. "I'm not doing this because I hate you, Cameron. I'm doing it because I'm afraid she's going to get hurt again. Lena protected her fiercely. You weren't there." "I know. She deserves someone stable. She has that, with me. You're still the man who flew halfway across the world for a stock launch and didn't call Lena back." "I was wrong. I was stupid. I know that. But I'm here now, and I love her. And she loves me. Isn't that worth something?" "It's worth a lot," Meredith admitted, "but it's not everything." He didn't argue. "I'm not filing anything," she said finally, "yet. But I will be at the hearing. If I don't believe this is real, if I think for 1 second this is about image or redemption or guilt, I'll fight you. Because I owe that to Lena and to Harper." "Fair. Good." They hung up. He didn't tell Harper, and he didn't need to. The next few days, she watched him more closely, asked more questions, hugged him a little longer before bed. The night before the court date, he found her sitting by the window in her room, the lights off, Pickles curled in her lap. "You nervous?" he asked. She nodded. "Are you?" He knelt beside her. "I'm terrified." "Do you think they'll let me stay?" "I do." "But what if they don't?" He looked at her, heart aching. "Then I will fight until they do." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "I wrote something, for the judge, in case they ask me anything." He opened it. In her careful, looping handwriting, "I don't care if we share blood. We share mornings. We share dinners. We share laughter. He makes me feel safe. And when he hugs me, I feel like I've been found. Please don't take that away." His voice caught. He folded the paper and held it to his chest. "Can I keep this?" She nodded. "It's for both of us." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the city alive outside the windows, and held Lena's letter in one hand and Harper's in the other. He had never been more afraid of losing anything in his life. The courtroom was smaller than Cameron expected. Not the grand marble hall he imagined, no towering columns or echoing silence, just a simple space with wooden benches, off-white walls, and the faint scent of floor polish clinging to the air. It felt more like a library than a place where lives could be changed forever. Harper wore a navy blue dress. She'd chosen it herself. "It makes me look calm," she'd said. Her hair was braided to one side, and she held Cameron's hand with quiet strength. Beth Kaplan, Cameron's attorney, stood beside them, briefcase in one hand and calm confidence in the other. She had prepped him all morning. "Be honest, be specific, don't over-explain. Judges don't want drama, they want clarity and consistency." Across the aisle, Meredith sat in the visitors' row, arms folded, lips tight. She didn't look hostile, just tired and wary. Harper gave her a small wave. Meredith nodded, then looked away. The judge entered, a woman with sharp eyes, gray curls, and an expression that said she had no patience for theater. She reviewed the documents in silence for a moment, flipping pages in a manila folder. "Mr. Wexler," she said without looking up, "you've filed for legal guardianship of Harper Morgan, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And you acknowledge that you were not previously listed as her father on record?" "I do." "You have since completed a DNA verification process confirming paternity. Is that accurate?" "Yes." "And are you prepared to assume all legal, financial, and custodial responsibilities with no expectation of compensation or government assistance?" "Yes." She looked up at him finally. "You run a corporation valued in the billions. This is a significant lifestyle change. Why now?" Cameron glanced at Harper. She was watching him, her hands folded in her lap. "Because I didn't know before," he said, "and now that I do, there's nothing more important." The judge raised an eyebrow. "That's not a legal argument." "I understand, but it's the truth. I didn't get to be there when she was born, or when she took her first steps, or when she started drawing the world the way only she sees it. I can't fix that, but I can give her a safe home, a stable one, a place to dream, and to be herself, and I can show up for every single day from here on out." The judge nodded once. "Ms. Morgan, do you wish to speak?" Harper stood. She was so small in that room, so still. But when she opened her mouth, her voice was clear. "He didn't know about me," she said. "But I think part of him was waiting anyway, because the first time we had waffles, he looked like he'd never tasted them right before. And when I talk, he listens like he's learning something new every time." She took a breath. "He lets me keep pictures of my mom on the wall. He doesn't try to replace her, but he doesn't disappear either. He's there when it's hard. He's there when it's boring. He's just there." Her voice broke just a little. "I want to stay with him." The courtroom was silent. Even Meredith wiped at one eye with the edge of her sleeve. The judge looked down at her papers, then back up at Cameron. "I'm not in the business of creating fairy tales," she said. "But I do believe in second chances, when they're earned. And Mr. Wexler, from what I've seen and read, you've earned this." She reached for her pen. "Guardianship is granted." The sound of her signature scratching the page might as well have been thunder. Cameron exhaled. Harper's hand found his again, and he realized she was squeezing his fingers now, to anchor him. The gavel hit the bench. The decision was final. He was her father. Legally, publicly, permanently. Beth squeezed his shoulder. Meredith nodded once across the aisle, and, to his shock, gave him a soft smile. As they walked out into the bright April air, Harper twirled once in the sunlight and said, "Can we get pancakes to celebrate?" He laughed, a sound that came from somewhere far deeper than his chest. "We can get pancakes every day from now on." The diner they chose wasn't fancy. It had vinyl booths, syrup bottles slightly sticky to the touch, and waitresses who called everyone "Hon" without asking your name. But Harper loved it instantly. "This is the kind of place where you don't have to be anyone special," she said, sliding into the booth. Cameron stirred cream into his coffee, watching her pour syrup over a mountain of pancakes like it was an art form. "You're someone special," he said without thinking. She looked at him for a long second, then smiled. "I mean, you don't have to pretend." He nodded, understanding more than he could say. The weeks that followed unfolded with the kind of quiet beauty Cameron hadn't known life could hold. There were still hard moments, times when Harper grew quiet at bedtime, times when she cried without explanation. She missed Lena in sudden, unexpected ways. Once it was over a song in a store. Another time, because she found one of her mother's old scarves tucked inside a coat pocket. But Cameron didn't try to fix those moments. He just sat with her, let her feel it all, held her hand when she reached for his, even if she didn't say a word. And something changed in him, too. He let his assistant take meetings without him, let go of 3 advisory roles, restructured his calendar so that he was home every day by 5. He still worked, of course, but he no longer hid inside it. On weekends, they went to bookstores and street fairs. Cameron bought her a camera, like the one Lena used to carry, and they spent an entire Saturday taking photos of pigeons, cracks in the sidewalk, and sunlight slanting through scaffolding. At night, she printed them and taped her favorites to the wall beside her bed. "This one," she said once, pointing to a photo of Cameron laughing, head thrown back. "This is my favorite." "Why?" "Because you didn't know I was taking it." He looked at the photo. He did look happy, unburdened. "I want to remember you that way," she said. That night, he sat on his own bed and opened Lena's letter again. It was soft at the folds now, creased and worn, the ink smudged in one corner. "She's the best part of me," Lena had written, "and maybe she'll be the best part of you, too." He looked around the apartment. It had changed. The once sterile lines were now interrupted by color, art supplies, books, a pair of glittery sneakers by the door. Pickles had claimed the back of the couch as his throne. The place no longer smelled like polished stone and expensive air. It smelled like cinnamon, lavender shampoo, and life. The night before Harper's first birthday as his daughter, his officially, he stayed up late, wrapping gifts he'd picked out one by one. A new set of brushes, a small sculpture kit, a book of letters from famous artists to their children, and tucked inside the last box, a simple necklace with a tiny silver charm in the shape of a key. The next morning, she opened it last. She held it up, confused. "What's it open?" "Nothing," he said. "Not yet. It's just a reminder." "Of what?" He smiled. "That you were the one who opened everything in me." She stared at it for a moment, then leaned across the table and hugged him so tightly he nearly lost his breath. "Happy birthday," he whispered. She pulled back, eyes shining. "It already is." Summer came to New York in slow, golden waves. Harper turned 10 that July, and though it wasn't her first birthday without Lena, it was the first one that didn't feel like a fracture. Instead of absence, there was something new, a quiet, growing presence that made space for both grief and joy to exist side by side. They spent the day at the Botanical Gardens. Harper walked ahead on the stone paths, camera swinging at her side, asking questions about everything. Cameron answered the ones he knew, and for the ones he didn't, he simply said, "Let's find out together." Later, they sat under a tree eating sandwiches and chocolate cake from a bakery Harper had chosen weeks before. "You think she would have liked this place?" Harper asked, stretching out in the grass. "I think she'd love it," Cameron said, "and I think she'd love you even more now." "She used to say the world was a garden you had to plant yourself," Harper said, "that even if someone else gave you the seeds, you had to do the watering." Cameron smiled. "And what do you think?" She turned to him, her face solemn beneath the branches. "I think she gave you the seeds, and now you're the reason I'm growing." He swallowed. "I've made so many mistakes, Harper, but not this one." They stayed until the garden closed, and even then, neither of them wanted to leave. That night, Harper fell asleep with the window open, the summer air drifting in. Pickles lay curled at her feet. Cameron stood in the doorway for a long moment, just watching her breathe. He thought about the man he had been, measured, guarded, impenetrable. A man who believed that success came from subtraction, cutting away distractions, trimming out complications, boiling everything down to goals and margins. But Harper had taught him a new kind of math. Love didn't subtract. It added. It layered. It multiplied. And it had given him something he had never dared to want, a life that mattered, not because it was admired, but because it was shared. He walked down the hall, past the wall now filled with her photos, her art, her world slowly stitched into his. At the center hung a new frame, one she had put there that morning. A photo of them, taken by someone at the birthday picnic. They were laughing, both of them. Sunlight spilling through the trees, no posing, no performance, just truth. Below it, she'd written in thick black marker, "The day I stopped waiting." Cameron sat down on the couch, the air humming around him like the last line of a song. He didn't need to look further. He was already home. A year passed? Not in the way years used to pass Cameron Wexler, blurred by flights, bottom lines, and blinking cursor deadlines, but in real time, marked by birthdays and report cards, lost teeth and weekend art fairs, quiet mornings and late-night questions about grief, God, and whether macaroni could be classified as a vegetable if you added peas. Harper started 5th grade with a pencil case she organized like a mission-critical toolkit. She wrote an essay titled "The Best Decision Someone Else Ever Made," about the day the judge signed her guardianship papers. Cameron only found out when her teacher emailed him saying it made the whole class cry. He didn't cry. He read it in his car, gripping the steering wheel like it might float away if he let go. She drew less often now, but when she did, her work was sharper, bolder. Color used not just to mimic the world, but to declare it. She painted a portrait of Cameron once without telling him. It hung in the hallway beside the photo of their first day at the gardens. "You made me look nicer than I am," he said. "I made you look how I see you," she replied. "You can't help it if I like you more than you like yourself." Cameron changed too. Slowly, then all at once. He started mentoring again, but not for profit. He set up a foundation in Lena's name, the Morgan Project, offering education grants to single parents who had slipped through the system's cracks. He gave talks at conferences where, for the first time in his career, he didn't mention IPOs or portfolio targets. He talked about grace and silence, and what happens when you say yes to a life you didn't expect. He kept Harper's photo in his wallet, the one of her holding her crayon resume, smiling in that wobbly, unguarded way, taken just 2 days after the court hearing. That smile had become his compass. She asked him, once, if he missed who he used to be. "Not for a second," he said. "That man thought peace was something you bought." They traveled over spring break, Harper's first time on a plane. She wore a backpack larger than her torso and held his hand tight during takeoff. They went to San Francisco, rode cable Wexler, visited the ocean. She took a photo of him standing in front of the Golden Gate Bridge and drew it later, replacing the bridge with a winding path and scribbling the word "nowhere" on one end and "found" on the other. "I used to think I had to find you," she said as she showed it to him. "But really, I think we just had to get to the same place at the same time." His voice caught. "I think you're right." That summer, Harper came home from camp with a scraped knee, a box full of pine cones, and a new word, forever. "You know that's not a number," she said as they sat on the back steps. "It's more like a promise." "Yes," Cameron said, "it is." "Do you promise?" He didn't hesitate. "Forever." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "I believe you." That night, he tucked her in and stood in her doorway longer than usual. She was getting taller, her legs now stretched to the bottom of the bed. The drawings on the wall had evolved, from stick figures to full canvases, from wondering to knowing. He went back to his room, opened his laptop, and started a new document. Not for a contract, not for a speech, but for a letter, one she'd read someday. "To my daughter, you once walked into my life without knocking, without warning, and without apology, and you changed everything. You showed me that time doesn't make a parent, that biology doesn't make love, that the bravest people are sometimes the smallest ones, the ones who hold out their hand and say, 'Try.' Thank you for letting me try. Thank you for staying. Thank you for making me better. You were never a burden. You were a bridge, one I didn't know I needed to cross. And now I don't know how I lived on the other side so long. I love you, Dad. There were more years to come, awkward ones, messy ones, first crushes, hard losses, college applications, fights that left rooms cold, forgiveness that made them warm again. They were not perfect, but they were true. And sometimes, late at night, long after the lights were out, Harper would walk quietly to his room and crawl beside him like she had when she was 8 and scared. And without words, without asking, He would pull the blanket over her and let her fall asleep beside the man who almost never got the chance to be her father. And did it anyway. Harper was 13 when Cameron finally realized she had grown taller than the kitchen counter. It struck him one morning as she poured herself orange juice in a faded hoodie and mismatched socks, humming something that sounded like an old Beatles tune. "You're taller," he said, still half asleep. "I know," she replied. "I've been measuring myself against the cabinets. I'm officially 5'2" and 3/4. 3/4? Every fraction counts." That was the year she asked to repaint her room. The drawings came down, carefully, not destroyed, just stored, and the new color she picked was a soft slate blue. She said it made her feel focused. She started a journal she didn't let him read, listened to music he didn't understand, and went through a phase where she called every meal aesthetic. She also started asking harder questions. Why didn't you and Mom stay in touch? Were you afraid of being a dad? Do you think she would have forgiven you? He never shied away from answering. He told her the truth, that he had been selfish, that he didn't know what he was missing, that he thought success meant walls instead of roots. "That's why I ran," he said one night, the rain tapping gently on the windows. "But she didn't tell me about you. Maybe because she knew I wasn't ready." Harper nodded. "I don't blame her. You weren't." He laughed. "Fair. But you're not that person anymore." "No. And that's why I stay." She squeezed his hand. "Because you changed." He looked at her, at the young woman emerging before his eyes, and said, "No, because you changed me." That fall, Cameron was invited to give a commencement address at a prestigious business school. The dean wanted him to speak about leadership and legacy. 10 years ago, he would have launched into a monologue about innovation and profit. But now? He stood on that stage, gray at the temples, wearing a suit Harper had helped him choose, and said, "I used to think legacy was built in boardrooms, in strategy decks and press releases, but then one morning, a little girl sat in my chair and said a sentence that stopped my world. And everything that followed, every soft, slow, clumsy attempt to show up for her, became the only thing I care to be remembered for." He didn't mention company valuation. He didn't list accomplishments. He didn't need to. Back home, Harper watched the speech online, sitting cross-legged on the couch with Pickles asleep beside her. When it ended, she opened her sketchbook and wrote one sentence beneath a half-drawn photo of her and Cameron sitting on the back steps of the house. "I gave him the chance, and he gave me everything else." That winter, Cameron surprised her with a trip. Not to Paris, not to the Maldives, but to a small town in Maine, Lena's hometown. Harper had never been. They stayed in a tiny bed and breakfast and visited the cemetery where Lena was buried, just beyond a quiet grove of pine trees. Harper brought flowers, lilies and asters, and a letter she had written months ago but never read aloud. Cameron stood back and gave her space. He watched her kneel beside the headstone, brush away leaves, and whisper words only her mother would hear. He watched her cry, but not like she used to, not with despair, but with peace. Her grief had become part of her, like a scar that no longer stung, only reminded. On the last day of the trip, they visited the local library. Harper wandered off into the children's section. Cameron sat by the window with a small stack of Old Town records, paging through years he never knew Lena had lived. He found a note in the margins of an old newspaper, a doodle, a signature, L. Morgan, 2007. It hit him like sunlight through fog. "Hey," Harper said, walking over with a stack of books. "Can I get these?" He blinked. "Of course." They drove home through snow, the world soft and quiet, and for once Cameron didn't worry about his calendar or his missed calls. He only worried about whether they had enough hot cocoa mix at home. In the spring, Harper applied to a selective visual arts high school. She spent weeks preparing her portfolio. On the day the results came in, she came home breathless, a letter in hand. "I got in," she said, eyes wide, voice cracking. "I actually got in." He held her as she shook. "You earned every bit of it." "I want to make you proud," she whispered. You already do, he said. Every single day. At orientation, a teacher asked if Harper's parents would like to share a few words. Cameron stood with her, hand on her shoulder. I'm not the father who raised her from day one, he said, but I'm the father who was lucky enough to be invited in. Harper reached for his hand, and they stood together in front of strangers who saw them not as a story, but as a family. And that was all either of them had ever needed. By the time Harper turned 15, her world had stretched far beyond what either of them had imagined. She was thriving at the arts high school. Her teachers called her focused, intuitive, deeply original. She'd won second place in a regional youth art competition and had been invited to contribute to a community mural downtown. The mural was her idea, a collage of faces from the neighborhood, shopkeepers, bus drivers, the woman who sang opera at the subway station. She titled it, We Belong Here. Cameron attended the unveiling in a gray overcoat and scarf Harper had knit herself. As she stood in front of the crowd, microphone in hand, she introduced him without a title. This is the man who helped me paint my world. After the applause, she returned to his side and slipped her arm through his. Did you mean that? He whispered. Every word, she said. That night, over takeout and twinkle lights they'd strung on the balcony, Harper looked up from her sketchbook and said, Do you think we should write a book? A book? He repeated, surprised. Not a tell-all, she clarified. Just something real. About how families start in unexpected places. About how it's okay to be scared as long as you stay. He leaned back in his chair, smiling. And what would we call it? She didn't hesitate. The Chair. It was a perfect title. So they wrote it, over months, in fits and starts. Harper wrote about Lena, about that first walk through the tower lobby, about what it felt like to sit in a chair too big for her and ask for a chance. Cameron wrote about silence, regret, and the tiny everyday ways Harper dismantled everything he once thought he needed to be strong. The book was small, quiet, but it resonated. They published it through a modest imprint. It didn't go viral. It didn't need to. People sent letters, single fathers, adopted daughters, teachers, grandparents raising grandchildren. Letters about love arriving late, about second chances that stuck, about children who said, please stay, and adults who finally said, yes. Cameron donated the proceeds to the Morgan Project. Harper gave a TEDx talk. Her topic? Belonging is a choice we make together. She stood on that stage, her voice steady, her hair pulled back, her necklace, a tiny silver key catching the light. I walked into his office with a drawing, she said. I asked him to see me, not save me, just see me. And he did. That changed his life, but it changed mine more. When she came off stage, she found him waiting in the wings. Was I okay? She asked, cheeks flushed. You were extraordinary, he said. She hugged him, tighter than usual. You didn't just stay, she whispered. You became home. Later that year, they visited the mural again, now sun-faded in places, but still vibrant. Someone had added a new face to the edge of the wall. It was smaller than the others, subtle, almost hidden among the layers, but Harper recognized it instantly. Lena. No one claimed responsibility. Harper took a photo and set it as her phone wallpaper. She always finds her way back, she said. Cameron nodded. She never really left. The seasons turned. Harper prepared for college. Art school applications filled the dining table. She narrowed it down to 3, then 2, then 1. A school upstate with old brick buildings and a studio space that smelled like turpentine and possibility. Cameron tried not to cry the day she got in. I'll still come home, she promised. I know, he said, and you'll still send me texts with too many periods. I will. And when move-in day came and he stood in the doorway of her dorm room while she arranged a sketch of Lena on her shelf, he realized something profound. He hadn't saved her. She'd saved them both. Harper called him once a week, every week, without fail. Sometimes it was just to say she was okay. Other times it was to vent about critiques in her drawing class, or to ask how Pickles was doing. Still dramatic, he'd report. But always at the end she said, "Love you, Dad?" And Cameron always said, "Love you more." She came home for holidays, summers, and sometimes random weekends when she just wanted to be near her roots. She still took over the kitchen counter with her sketchbooks and supplies, still raided his freezer for frozen waffles, still knew which of his silences meant, "I'm proud of you," and which meant, "I miss you." She brought friends home, first one, then another. Then a young woman with paint-streaked jeans and a laugh that echoed through the apartment like wind chimes. "This is Jules," Harper said, not looking away. "We've been dating for 7 months." Cameron didn't blink. He just smiled and held out his hand. "Welcome home," he said. Later that night, while Harper and Jules played a card game on the living room floor, he walked into his study and opened the drawer where he kept Lena's letter. It was yellowing now, the creases soft and permanent. He read it once more. "She's yours." It still stunned him, because now she wasn't just his, she was her own. And that, he knew, was the point of all of it. 3 years passed. Harper graduated with honors. Her final exhibit was a multimedia series titled Echoes from the First Step. At its center stood a sculpture, a steel and wire replica of a tall chair, just slightly too big for the viewer, with a small pair of shoes at its base and a note taped to the seat. "I didn't know what I was starting, but I'm glad I walked in." Cameron stood in front of it for a long time. Later that night, Harper found him outside, sitting under the string lights of the museum courtyard. "You okay?" she asked, sliding into the chair beside him. He nodded, "Just thinking about how far we've come." She rested her head on his shoulder. "It still doesn't feel real sometimes." "It feels more than real," he said. "It feels earned." The next fall, Harper began teaching part-time while freelancing as an artist. She opened a studio space downtown with 2 sunlit rooms and a hand-painted sign that simply said, "Harper and Cooney." The Cody was for Lena, and for Cameron, and for anyone who had helped her bloom. Then came the day she stood in the doorway of his office again, this time in her mid-20s, holding a portfolio and something else, a printout, a formal letter. She placed it on his desk. He read it, blinking. "You're applying to adopt?" he asked softly. She nodded. "Her name's Marisol. She's 7. She draws like I did. She's been through more than she should have." Cameron stared at her for a moment, heart swelling. "Do you remember what you said to me that day?" he asked. She grinned. "I think I said, 'You used to know my mom.'" "No," he said. "The part that stopped me cold." She thought for a moment. "Oh, right." She looked down at her hands. "I just want to know if you want me." He reached across the desk and took her hand. "You have no idea how glad I am that I said yes." She squeezed his fingers. "Me too. So, will you come with me when I meet her?" "I wouldn't miss it for anything." A few weeks later, they walked into a small foster home on the edge of Brooklyn. A little girl sat alone at a plastic table, drawing with broken crayons. Harper knelt. "Hi, Marisol. I'm Harper. This is my dad, Cameron. We came because we saw your drawings, and they're beautiful." The girl didn't speak at first. She just looked up at the two of them, her dark eyes wide. Then she pushed a crumpled paper across the table. It was a picture of a house, with a garden and a window filled with light. Underneath it, she had written in crooked block letters, "I want a window like this one day." Harper looked at Cameron. He was already nodding. "Yes," she whispered to Marisol, "let's build it together." Cameron passed away 5 years later quietly in the house Harper bought just outside the city. His final days were spent surrounded by laughter, paint, music, and the feeling of being exactly where he belonged. Harper read the eulogy herself. "He didn't know how to be a father when we met," she said, voice strong and soft, "but he became the kind of father who stayed, who grew, who let himself be changed. And because he said yes to me, I got to say yes to someone else. She looked at the front row where Marisol sat between Jules and a woman from the Morgan Project. That's how love works, she said. It echoes, it expands, and it remembers. Later that night, Harper placed a small drawing beside his headstone. A crayon sketch of a man in a chair and a little girl with her hand on his. She left the letter she once wrote for the judge inside a folded envelope beneath it. He makes me feel safe. When he hugs me, I feel like I've been found, and written in tiny script beneath it, forever. 20 years later, Harper stood in front of a different building, not a tower this time. A school, a quiet 2-story community center in Queens, with ivy crawling up the bricks, and a wide ramp that curved toward the front doors like an open hand. Above the entrance hung a metal sign, the Morgan Wexler School for Creative Growth. She hadn't built it alone. It had taken donors, architects, partners, patience. But the vision had always been hers, something she sketched on napkins and margins of notebooks in her 20s, something that whispered to her every time she passed a kid sitting alone with a pencil and too many thoughts. Inside, the school buzzed with a soft chaos of art. Smells of clay, linseed oil, paper. Kids darted between rooms with paint on their sleeves and purpose in their steps. Harper walked through the halls like she always did, greeting names, answering questions, pausing to admire a collage, or nod at a young girl trying to decide if yellow belonged in shadows. Marisol taught here now. She was 27, fierce, funny, always late and unapologetic with paint under her nails and a playlist of jazz and lo-fi, always humming behind her classroom door. She waved from across the hallway. "You're giving the talk, right?" Harper smirked. "Trying to back out?" Marisol laughed. "Absolutely. They're second graders. I'm scared of them." So Harper walked into the multi-purpose room with its mismatched chairs and curious faces and cleared her throat. "Hi," she began, voice soft and confident. "My name is Harper. I started this school because once, a long time ago, I walked into a very tall building and sat in a very big chair." The kids giggled. "I was 8. I had a crayon drawing in my hand, and I said something that scared me to say. I asked a stranger if he wanted me." She paused. "He said yes." Her eyes drifted to the back of the room, where the staff had hung a framed photo of Cameron beside Lena, one taken from the book they had written, The Chair. He was smiling in the photo, unposed, free. "That man became my dad, not by blood, by choice." The kids were quiet, listening, like they were hearing a fairy tale. "And because he said yes to me," Harper said, "I learned how to say yes to other people. And now we get to make a place where everyone is welcome, even if they walk in scared. Especially if they walk in scared." A small hand in the front row went up, a boy with glasses. "Do you think I could start a school one day?" Harper smiled. "I think you just have to say yes to one moment, one person, one chair, and that moment could change everything." Terward. She walked back to her office, a cozy corner room with sun-warmed floors and too many plants. On the windowsill sat the original drawing, the one she had handed to Cameron all those years ago, preserved, faded, sacred. Beside it was a framed print of the mural she'd once painted, "We Belong Here." And in a small wooden box on the shelf was a letter, the last one Cameron ever wrote to her. She opened it once a year on his birthday. "You gave me something I didn't know I needed, not a second chance. A first one I was too blind to see. Thank you for walking in, and thank you for staying." She sat at her desk, the sun hitting her back, and pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. There was one more letter to write, for Marisol, for the next kid, for herself. She didn't know exactly what she'd say yet, but she knew how she'd begin. To the one who's just taken their first brave step, and that would be enough. It was a rainy Tuesday when Harper found herself back in Midtown, the wind curling between buildings like it had a secret to tell. She hadn't planned to stop. She'd been on her way to a meeting about expanding the Morgan Wexler School to a second location in Newark. But when the cab turned the corner and she saw the familiar curved glass and polished revolving doors of the old Wexler building, something in her chest stirred. She asked the driver to wait. The lobby hadn't changed much. Sleek marble, cold light, people moving with purpose. It smelled of fresh coffee and ambition. She walked through the entrance, head held high, the security guard barely glancing at her as she crossed the floor. Just another professional woman in a city built on them. But to her, this wasn't just a lobby. It was the place where her story began. She paused in front of the elevator, the same one she had taken as a child, knees trembling, backpack too heavy. She remembered the receptionist, the carpet that swallowed her footsteps, the way the chair felt under her legs, too high, too soft, too much. She closed her eyes just for a second, and there it was, her mother's voice in her ear. "If anything ever happens to me, you find him." She opened her eyes again and smiled. Because she had found him, and he'd found her. Harper didn't ride the elevator. The company had long since changed hands. The office was no longer his. It didn't need to be. Instead, she stepped to the side, opened her bag, and pulled out a folded paper. It was a copy of the original drawing, not the crayon one. This one was rendered in ink and watercolor now, elegant but simple. It showed a girl in a chair holding a piece of paper. She taped it gently to the base of the wall near the elevator bank, where eyes rarely wandered. Beneath it, in block letters, she wrote, "I walked in, he stayed." Then she turned and left, back into the city, back into the rain, back into the life they had built, one step, one word, one yes at a time. On a warm September morning, Harper stood at a podium in front of a crowd gathered under a white tent. Behind her, a construction crew had just broken ground on what would become the second Morgan Wexler School for Creative Growth. The foundation was still dirt, the walls not yet framed, but the future had already begun. She wore a slate-gray dress, simple earrings, and a pin with Lena's initials etched in gold. Marisol sat in the front row, hand in hand with her own daughter, Harper's goddaughter, who had just started kindergarten. Harper looked out at the crowd and smiled. "I used to think this story started with a drawing," she said. "And in many ways it did. One I made in crayon, clutched tight in my hand when I walked into a tower too tall for a kid like me to belong in." She paused. "But it really started the moment someone looked up from a busy life, from a perfectly ordered world, and chose to stay, chose to listen, chose to let himself be changed." Her voice caught just slightly, then steadied. "My dad wasn't perfect, neither was I. But we were brave. We showed up. We made room. And that is what we're building here, places where people can walk in scared, uncertain, small, and be reminded they matter, that they are wanted, that they are seen." She reached into her bag and pulled out a framed copy of the original letter Cameron had written to the judge all those years ago. "I've kept this," she said, "not because of the court's stamp, but because it taught me something important." She stepped off the podium and knelt beside the first support beam laid in the soil. With a careful hand, she placed the letter into a weatherproof case and sealed it into the foundation. "So that every child who walks through these doors," she said quietly, "will know this place was built by someone who said yes when it mattered most." The wind picked up, the tent fluttered, and somewhere in the distance a chime rang faintly, like memory, like echo, like legacy.